Hi guys, Olive here today to review two different books that have the same title. They are two very different books. One is a memoir, one is a more general work of nonfiction, but both are titled Rust. Let's start with the memoir. Rust, a memoir of steel and grit by Eliese Colette Goldbach, was published in 2020 by Flatiron Books, which is a division of Macmillan, and the hardcover copy that I purchased with my own money comes in at 320 pages. The author of this book is a former steel worker, which was a very unexpected career path for her. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, part of the so-called Rust Belt here in the United States, where the steel industry was, and still is to some degree, so she knew of the local steel mill, but she never dreamed that she would end up working there. She just seemed destined for other things. She went to college, she moved on to graduate school, originally thinking that she was going to become a nun. But a combination of factors, including her very unpredictable bipolar disorder, led to her being out of graduate school without an actual master's degree in hand, but with all of the debts that she had accumulated over the course of her schooling, so she needed to make money somehow. She was originally painting houses, and then a friend told her just how much money she could make as a steel worker. The steel mill pays a lot of money. You could largely consider it hazard pay because the job is so dangerous, but it is a highly coveted position in the area because of the high pay and because of the union protection. So it's actually a very extensive and competitive process to get a job at the steel mill, even though it is so dangerous. And after going through that process, our author started her career as a steel worker. Throughout this memoir, the author talks extensively about the job itself. She discusses what it's like starting off as an orange hat, which is what all new hires are called because they wear orange hats until they've worked enough hours to graduate to wearing yellow hats, at which point they can join the union. Right away, she's assigned to a highly desirable department, but still it is extremely difficult, physically demanding, dangerous work. She hears horror stories from employees who have worked at the mill for a very long time. She learns just how easy it is to get yourself injured or even killed. But the author talks about all aspects of what it was like working inside of this mill, not just the job, but also the dynamics within the mill. She talks a lot about the people who she worked with, her co-workers, a lot of whom were men. Suffice it to say that this steel mill, probably a lot of steel mills out there, are very male-dominated spaces. Hers definitely was, and although she did forge a lot of friendships, a lot of connections with men who worked there, some of the men were very, very supportive of her. Others, let's just say they held on to certain beliefs about women. In this memoir, while Goldbach is discussing everything that was going on inside of the steel mill, she's also talking a lot about what was going on outside of it, what all was going on in her life at the time, and then also everything that had led her up to this moment of becoming a steel worker. So she discusses extensively growing up in a very religious, conservative Midwestern household and how that shaped her as a young person. But then she also discusses how when she went to college, things really changed for her. During her first year, she went through something extremely traumatic, and it forced her to reevaluate what she wanted to do with her life and her worldview in general. She kind of had to reimagine what kind of a person she wanted to be. And in many ways, that contradicted her upbringing, leading her to a lot of painful moments where she found herself sitting almost on the opposite side of the table from her parents on a lot of different issues. Then in the present moment within the memoir, when she was working as a steel worker, she was dealing with all of the stresses from this new job. New jobs in general are very stressful, but hers was especially so because it was physically demanding on her body. The job itself was physically demanding. She was also working a lot of swing schedules, so her sleep was all over the place, and she was really worried that those things might push her into a bipolar episode. And she was worried about that not just because she didn't want to have that temporary break from reality that she had experienced before, but also because she was in a new-ish relationship and this man had never seen her in that state. and based on conversations that she had, or rather didn't really have with him, it didn't seem like he was going to know what to do when, not if, that happened to her again. I found this to be a really interesting memoir, and not just because it's absolutely fascinating to learn what happens behind the scenes in a steel mill and what all those types of jobs entail. There are so many different types of jobs within the mill. You get to learn about a lot of them. It's so fascinating hearing her account of what it was like, but it also seems like this time in the author's life was such a pivotal, transformational period. And I really liked that there was a parallel between her life and the actual steelmaking process, because steelmaking is a very transformational, hardening process. And during this time in her life, it seems like she was trying to figure out, how do I take my history, my upbringing, and figure out who I want to be going forward, bringing all the history of my life with me. So it made for a really satisfying reading experience. I think this book is really well written. I think it's very readable. And most importantly, I think she wrote it at the right time. I've spoken about this in videos in the past, but it has been a little while, so I'll reiterate. I think there is a sweet spot for when an author should write a memoir, because I think you need to be close enough to the events that you're going to be speaking about because you want to recount them faithfully, but you also want to be close enough to the emotions of that time that you can make them feel palpable. You can make the reader feel what it was like to be in your shoes during that period of time. But then you also want to be far enough away so that whatever was going on at the time doesn't feel so raw. And you also want to have a good amount of perspective on that time in your life. And I think this author nailed that, because you can feel what it was like working inside of the mill, but you can also tell that she's far enough away from it all to be able to put things into perspective. She can understand that time in her life within the grander context of her entire life. I do think there were a few things within this memoir that could have potentially been left out. That could just be me. I am all about brevity. I think if something is included in a book and it's not actively adding something, then it's subtracting from the experience. It's not the biggest deal in the world, and again, it could just be me, but that is something I noticed. Something else I definitely noticed that I don't think has much to do with the judgment of quality of this book, it's just something that I personally noticed. It definitely really bothered me, and so I thought I would say something about it. I never thought that boyfriend was right for her. I don't want to say too much about it because authors seem to have a way of finding their ways to my videos on a semi-frequent basis. And I've seen in an interview that this author married this person, and I don't want to be mean. And of course, things could have changed since the events of this book, but my feelings about that kind of remain the same based on everything I saw in this book. What's that saying? If they can't handle you at your worst, you know the rest. But overall, I found this to be a very powerful, very raw memoir. She's really not afraid to get honest, and it makes for a pretty spectacular reading experience. This is definitely one that I would recommend, especially if you're a fan of Educated by Tara Westover. But now onto the other book that I'm going to be reviewing in this video, another book titled Rust, but the subtitle of this one is The Longest War, and it's by Jonathan Waldman. It was published in 2015 by Simon & Schuster, and my paperback copy that I also bought with my own money comes in at 304 pages. This book is a really interesting mix of science, history, and personal anecdotes, and it begins with a very in-depth scientific discussion of what rust, that ubiquitous red, orange, brown splotching on metal, actually is. It's the corrosion of iron. Corrosion is the result of an everyday chemical reaction. Most metals, not all of them, but most of them, react with oxygen. In the air, in water, whatever contains oxygen, they will react with it. And it causes this deterioration, this gnawing away at the metal, which is actually the meaning of the word corrode. And unless that metal is protected from the oxygen, that reaction will take place and cause the deterioration of the metal and therefore compromise the structural integrity of anything that metal has been used to create. Rust has been a problem for humans for as long as we've been using metal. That is to say, as long as civilization has been around, and probably even earlier than that. There's a reason why the war against rust is referred to in the Bible as a losing battle. It is one of the biggest and most expensive burdens on life as we know it. This is a problem for industries, any industries that use metal, of course, but it's also an issue in our day-to-day lives. Anything made of metal has to be in some way protected from rusting, from corroding. And if that protection isn't adequate, if it fails, if it's not properly maintained, then things will begin to deteriorate and they have to be replaced. It's expensive, sure, but what's the alternative? Letting bridges fall down? Even though rust is such an everyday life kind of problem, it was a mystery to humanity for a very long time. We now know that it's the result of a chemical reaction, which could be an annoying one or a beautiful one, depending on how you look at it. And that's what the rest of this book deals with. After those chemical reactions have been thoroughly discussed, we move on to case studies of people who deal with rust in very active but all different ways. We start off the book with the story of the restoration of America's Statue of Liberty. Then we move into the history of the creation of different rust-resistant alloys like stainless steel. Then we get to learn about a woman who actually sneaks into an old steel mill in Pennsylvania to take photographs of rust because she finds rust very beautiful, very inspirational, an entirely different way of looking at it. There's a discussion about eroding pipelines. There's another about the very interesting process of galvanization. And there's an in-depth behind-the-scenes look at a campaign to increase awareness about corrosion, including a surprise cameo by Reading Rainbow's LeVar Burton. But by far the best chapter in this book, which I consider to be one step above an opinion and more just like an agreed upon fact because I've seen other people talk about how much they love this chapter as well, is the chapter on cans, on canning things, to use metal to house other types of products to then get it to the final consumer. The creation of those cans is so intricate, so complex, so thought through because of the concerns about rust. When you're creating a can, you have to be concerned about the can rusting just by itself or when coming into contact with whatever it's housing. And then you have to worry about the can itself, the metal used to create the can, potentially leaching out into the product that it's housing, affecting the quality or the taste if it's a food product. Like, who knew all of this thought had to go into such a common household item? It's that fight against rust that determines what kind of metal can be used in cans, what kind of coatings need to be placed on the insides of cans to protect the product from the can, but also the can from the product to make sure that the whole package is able to get onto your pantry safely. The history and the science of that is absolutely fascinating. Plus, there's the personal story that the author brings to the table because he went to this so-called can school to learn some of this and pretty much, but not really, got kicked out because he was asking too many questions. He's a journalist, in other words, and you can definitely feel that when you're reading this book. He's got some serious chops when it comes to storytelling, and I also really liked that he was upfront about his personal involvement in these stories. He had to go and collect these stories from people, and his personal involvement with them reads on the page. He includes himself in the story, and I really liked that. I thought it was very fitting that there was a Mary Roach blurb on the cover of my paperback, because his approach is very Mary Roach-like. It's personal, it's curious, and it's very humorous. I found this book to be really funny, but I also thought it was a little bit heavier on the science than any Mary Roach book that I have read in the past. So it's like a Mary Roach book, but it's got a few more teeth. The book did drag a bit in the back half, but I'm currently wondering, since I'm still kind of processing this book, if that was because that chapter on canning happened toward the middle and I kept waiting for anything that came after to be as interesting or as entertaining as that chapter was, and it never happened. So I don't know if I'm disappointed with the back half because of that, or if it really did suffer from some pacing issues. I did think the entirety of this book was interesting, but I think it has a star chapter, and I think the first half is a lot more interesting than the second half. But it is something I would recommend, especially for that first half. So if it sounds interesting to you, maybe just keep that in mind. Maybe this is something you would like to get out from the library. So those are my thoughts on two books called Rust. If you've read or are interested in either or both of these, please do let me know in the comment section below. You can also put any other general comments or questions you may have for me down there as well. But if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now, you can find me on a variety of places around the internets, including Goodreads and Instagram, where I'm the most active. The links to everywhere you can find me will be at the bottom of the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.